Okay, so Joe, now moving on to this. We've already talked about homeschool administrator, right? And the language. Now we're not parents anymore, right? In here. And we want you all to understand that impact. So, showing you now they're not calling you parents. You're now homeschool administrators, right? You keep
Yep.
reading, and all of a sudden they've redefined you again, right, Joe?
Yep.
But also, as you can see highlighted here, right? Joe, you want to highlight this word right here? The state board of education shall do what? I want to highlight that because it's something else that I know Joe's going to bring up later. But I do want to talk about this because now homeschool administrator, you're a parent, and now also look who's starting to now get involved and
Yep.
all the powers being shifted.
Yeah, that's exactly what they're doing is, like we've said before, they're trying to gain jurisdiction because they know they don't have it. And so the only way to
Exactly.
do it is through language, is to shift you out of being a parent with a private liberty interest into being a homeschool administrator. And, when the state, yes, can have the State Board of Education create something,
Sure.
but that doesn't mean that the people have to follow it. And
Exactly.
it's funny because when you understand these things, you say, okay, there's never going to be a statute that says the people shall, unless it's talking about retaining or reserving your rights or something like the people shall have a trial by jury or something like that. But when it gets to telling you something that you have to do, the state can't compel you to do these things.
That's
And
right.
so you have to read these things with the understanding of, is this written to me? If I understand I'm not a homeschool administrator, if I understand I'm not a non-public school, if I understand that I'm one of the people with private liberty interests, I can just read this and say, okay, well, that's for someone else, but it's not for me. It's just like if they have a statute that says, the garbage shall be collected on Tuesday. And if you want your garbage picked up, you got to go
Right.
put it out. But
And you
if
can
you don't
contract with the
care,
company.
yeah,
Yep.
if you don't care, then you don't need to do it. And so,
Right.
we read these things and this fear comes over us. And that's the whole point of this, is that we need to lose this fear of government and understand what they're trying to do, because we, the people, are the ones that are over government, not under it. And so,
Right.
it's no different than, I've used all kinds of examples before, but, if I go up to someone else's child and tell them to do something, are they going to listen to me? Well, it depends on what it is, but just a broad example. Or are they going to, in their minds, they already think like, you're not my dad. You're not my
Right.
mom. I don't have to
Right.
listen to you. Like, that's a natural thing that government has done a really good job of brainwashing it out of the people to be able to say, wait a minute, you don't have any authority to tell me to do that. And then we
That's
just
right.
simply ignore it.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. All right. And we can take that even further. Same thing as in schools.
Yeah,
I call schools, public schools, legalized prison for children.
that's
Think
pretty
about it.
accurate.
Bell rings, got to get permission to go to the bathroom. Even so many schools were
Yeah.
designed by the same architects that design our prisons.
Yeah. I was just talking to somebody the other day about this, and this entire mind shift that we're talking about, it's a mindset.
It
And if
is.
you've ever seen Shawshank Redemption,
Yes. Great movie.
it's the epitome of what's going on, where,
Yep.
the old man, I think his name was Charlie, he's in prison for so long, and then he finally gets out and ends up committing suicide because he's been institutionalized.
Correct.
He can't handle the freedom.
Yep. Yep.
And so he goes back to what's comfortable. And again, it's a biblical example. What did the people of Israel
Mm-hmm.
do when they were delivered from Egypt and got out into the wilderness? They started to clamor to go back to that slavery in Egypt because
That's
it
right.
was familiar to them.
Right.
And we are, as a generation of Americans, we're so far removed from what true freedom and liberty is that we can't even comprehend it
We
anymore.
can't comprehend the actual freedoms. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. I was having that conversation with my son at one point too. and really thinking about what that means. And you also used, I think, a key word, and we're talking, especially talking biblically here, is that fear,
Mhm.
right? And we talk about this all the time. I talk to it so much, of course, with all the clients and families that I'm talking to. So much of it's fear that holds them back, or that makes them feel that they have to, recreate school at home and force their child, or 8-year-old who needs to be running around to sit for 4 hours or whatever,
Yep.
right? I get it. I was that mom too at one point, and it's fear. That's
Yep.
it. It all comes back to fear. And they've done such a good job. And thank goodness, I think a lot of people are recognizing is when my kids at first thought, when I said COVID was a blessing, they were like, what? And I'm like, oh, no, no, no. Look how God is using this, because
Yep.
it makes people, it shakes you up. It gets us out of our comfort zone, for lack of a better, phrase there, in this sense, right? Questioning, wait a second, what's going on? Oh, fear. They're using fear
Yep. And
of
just one more
control.
analogy of that so that we really get it settled into our spirit. If in a proper relationship, a mother and father should not be in fear of their child. The child is their creation. Now,
That's
if that
right.
child grows up and is never disciplined and learned limits and constraints and things like that, then that child becomes rebellious and can overpower the parents. And we have to view our government the exact same way. We, the people, are the parents of our child, the government. We, the people, are the ones, we set the boundaries in place with our Constitution, but we've allowed our rebellious child to go out and do stuff. And now it's grown up to be this thing that
Yeah.
the system can overpower the people. But we don't ever lose our rights as being the parent. And when we begin to enforce things, when we begin to recur to the fundamental principles and put those boundaries back on,
Yep.
those children, known as the government, are going to have to come back into line and start to respect the boundaries that we've put in place. Because there is
Exactly.
discipline that we can do. We're
Exactly.
very
Great.
far removed from it because everybody
Hmm.
wants to know about what about the enforcement. Well, that day's coming,
Yeah.
but
You
first
have to
we have
first,
to
yeah,
tell them. It's like if you were a derelict dad and you were away from your son for a long time and you come back in just at the moment and be like, well, I'm dad, I'm going to do this stuff, and then start, laying down the law. They're not even going to know how to respond. They
right.
because they're so used to not having your authority exerted in their life. Well, our
Exactly.
government has gotten so used to not having the people's authority exerted on them that they don't even know how to respond. And
Right.
it's a huge problem that we have to get fixed because when we're talking about our legislators, we're talking about the court system, the executive branch, everything has grown into this thing that's basically one big, stubborn, rebellious child, especially in Illinois.
You're not kidding. You're not kidding. Joe and I were commiserating before we jumped on here about, okay, God's got a purpose, and we're here for a reason in Illinois. But Joe, that's a fantastic analogy. I think that is so effective. Exactly why I wanted to talk to you about this, because that to me epitomizes everything that's going on here. And like we've talked about before with respect to helping to re-educate and retrain. And we talked about this in our last recording where, you know, well-meaning people, these are good people. We're not here trying to say that every single representative is, terrible and, not trying to do
Mhm.
for their neighbors and their constituents. The problem is what Joe just said, and we've got to do that, is re-educate and retrain, right? But that also doesn't mean we shy away from asserting our authority now and continuing to do that, which is what Joe is doing. Fantastic stuff. Okay, let's keep going on our homeschool bill here, on this homeschool act, as we walk through a lot of this. And this is the same one that we were just talking about before, Joe, I think, but it has this down here. So that we highlighted
Yeah,
here.
and
Yep.
there again, the word shall means that you
Mm-hmm.
must do it. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's saying
And
that a
this is
homeschool,
directing the people.
right.
I think
So
that's why, yeah.
So if you just replace that with people there, they're trying to tell the people that they have to do something. So they create a form. I mean, think about this for a moment. When you're born, do you have to create a form that tells you that you're one of the people? Now, yeah, there's different things like the birth certificates or passports and stuff for different credentials and things.
But
But
again, that's a government instituted program,
yep, it's a made up
right?
form. And if you want to
It's very
partake of the
different,
benefits,
right?
then you've got to do some of the things. But, in
Right.
this case, the parents that want to perform their private liberty interest of educating their children they're not even seeking for any benefit from government for it.
Right.
There is no government process to go through to just do something you're at liberty to do. And that's what,
Exactly.
like, this whole thing is just a play on words.
Yes. And a redefinition, which is why we wanted to point out to you that changing your name from parent to homeschool administrator is huge. All right. Again, now we're going to move into this lovely punishment without due process that we
Right.
brought up before, right? And what we're
Yep.
talking about here is when you've got truancy. Now, I don't know about anybody watching this, but our thought of truancy and that definition, by the way, which is in the statutes currently, is when children are not being educated. They've now redefined that, oh, with just a particular class of people. And homeschool administrators, get this, if you don't just simply file a piece of paper, your child is now considered truant.
Yep.
It is the height of insanity, even within statutory law,
Hmm.
right? Even if you're in the statutory system, this is completely incongruous and redefining and completely contrary to the definition. So they're now pulling out this class of people, and you're completely, like Joe was talking about earlier, we were talking about guilty until proven innocent,
Hmm.
period.
Yeah.
Your
And at
child could be the most educated there is. Go ahead. Yeah.
well, and at the top of it there, right there, it starts off
Yep.
with homeschool administrators' proof of high school graduation. Well,
Mhm.
what credentials do you have to be able to have children? You don't have any credentials that you have to meet. We all know the mechanics of how a child is created, but there's no credentials behind that. And by virtue of having a child, you have inherent liberties to educate the child.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not something that the state has any interest in. And, now of course it's good to educate our children and how the parents see fit, but there isn't any proof that I have to give that I'm able to educate my child. And then it gets down into the truancy thing and it says failure to submit truancy educational portfolio.
Yep.
Homeschool administrator for a child enrolled in a homeschool program has not submitted to the principal of the applicable public school. So right there, they're trying to, by statute, have the principal of your local school district who's not even elected. I mean,
Right.
now we're
Right.
way far down the line here, but
The chain.
they're empowering
Yep.
these unelected bureaucrats and a high school
Mm-hmm.
principal from your
Yep.
local school district to basically come in and have authority as a parent in your home. And then it goes on that it says the child shall be considered truant. Well, just like you said earlier, that is automatically placing you in the category of guilty and then have to prove your innocence rather than the true lawful way to do things in America, which is American jurisprudence is you're innocent until proven guilty. And
Yep.
we really have to get back to some of these things of due process.
Yes, we do.
It goes on to say that the homeschool administrator for the child shall be subject to the penalties. Pay attention to that one right there. That means that they can impose a penalty without giving you due process. Now, we have to recognize that a high school principal of a local school district is a government agent. They fall into a category where they have to prove their innocence or they're guilty, because that's how our system works, where those people have to be able to prove their grants of power and prove through different processes that they're innocent of something. Whereas the people, we only
Yep.
have to be innocent until proven guilty. And so there's a whole paradigm.
It shifts the entire burden of proof. Yep.
Mhm.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
And then I love section B here. A truant officer, regional office of education, or intermediate service center must send a notice required under section 26 of the school code to the homeschool administrator. And then it goes on to say the homeschool administrator is operating homeschool program and has not notified the public school through submission of the homeschool declaration form. This notice must include blah, blah, blah. Notice how they're using the word notice. And that's why we're doing a notice, because we can do everything that they think they can do to us. And that's why we're sending notice, because everything in law is not done under table, behind closed doors, and without due process, but it's out in the open. And going back to a point you were making earlier, there needs to be controversy over these things. Because through controversy, the real law gets shown. Through controversy is when the truth comes to light. And
amen.
That's kind of the system that has been set up here in America, and according to God's law, is that there is a conflict, and then through the conflict, the truth comes out.
That's right. And light is shed, right? Mm-hmm. Can't hide in the darkness. Absolutely. So this moves on. Now we're moving on, right, to defining more, like the regional office of education. Now they're talking about the next governmental body, governmental agents, right, who they're transferring the power to, right? And here they say is empowered. I love that word that they use, Joe, right? Empowered to. Required, no. So again, no due process. No due process.
It says you right, like the choice of language is very interesting. It says the regional office of education is empowered to conduct truancy hearings and proceedings.
Yep.
All right, that's called what people would consider a court case, but it's all done unlawfully.
Administratively. And look what's been happening to parallel, Joe, at the federal level. Same thing. Supreme Court has said, oh, no. Right? These governmental agents who have just been appointed or hired, right, are now taking the place of our court system.
Yep. They're just trying to replace everything. So if we just shift over to the right side real quick, let's read our Constitution quick. Yep. And it says, the people shall have the right to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and other possessions against unreasonable searches, seizures, and invasions of privacy. No warrant shall issue without probable cause supported by affidavit. We really have to understand what due process is here, because
can I real quick, let's finish that, Joe, before you go on, because this part does get left off often, and I really want to highlight this, because without probable cause supported by affidavit, particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. That is so important. You can't just do this broad, hey, I'm going to come in and, search everything because I kind of believe this, right? No. That means I can go in your drawers and stuff. No, not if you're searching for a stolen car. That doesn't mean you can come in my house, open every drawer. There's no car in there.
Yep.
Right? Sorry. That's that one part, for me that's you're 100% so vitally important. Yeah.
You're 100% right. And that gets to the point of, because that's information that needs to be supported by an affidavit, which means you would have real evidence of something taking place.
That's the way you get probable cause. And that's what is so glossed over, even when I was practicing. Like, oh, no. When I did trainings for like village police officers, right? We would go do trainings for them. And this was, I know I was right out of school and got hazed a little bit, but I'm like, listen, I'm telling you right now, be specific, and they need to be specific.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, keep going.
Yeah, they absolutely do. And
Yeah,
so this is just where we have to see where they're changing the name of your papers, which is in
yeah,
our Constitution, to educational portfolio,
yes.
because they know they can't just say, "Hey, we want to search your children's education documents or papers."
And they know
So
they can't come in your house to look at them, everybody.
they have to rename that stuff.
That's right.
Now I want to go up here in the please take notice part and just read through that so everybody gets an understanding, and then maybe we'll explain a little bit here. But it says,
Yeah.
please take notice. The people have reserved and secured. Now understand what that means. The people grant power, the people reserve power. We've reserved power, we've reserved our rights, and secured their persons, papers, and property and possessions against unreasonable searches and seizures, invasion of privacy. They're trying to get into your home. Those are your private documents, your private liberty interests of your children. These are all things that they're invading here.
And right to that point, Joe, in our last recording, if you all haven't seen it yet, watch it, because we go into some case law in there that was written by Sandra Day O'Connor.
Mm-hmm.
And she actually is someone in law school that I read a lot of her opinions. I really was very interested in this exact point, because when I ask people what specific rights are preserved in the Bill of Rights, just start naming some. So often people say privacy. I said, well, privacy is not specifically stated. However, right, it is an implied right. It doesn't say you have a right to privacy, but it does say you have a right to all of these other things. And Sandra Day O'Connor got that. And just like in the case that we talked about yesterday, the Troxville case, right? Wait, did I say that right? I always get that mixed up.
Troxville v.
The
Granville.
Troxville, it was Troxville. Okay.
Troxville v. Granville.
Troxel, that's it. So just like we talked about in there, and it was very clear, specifically with education, it's very important to understand that we do have a right to invasion of privacy, because that underlies exactly why we're being very specific about needing a warrant, right?
Yeah.
Probable cause, very specific. So it's important to point that out, because, and the way Joe did, you guys understand that, and to really help that seep in, you have a God-given unalienable right to privacy.
Yeah, and we really have to look at what that word means, because we've talked a bit about here on the public versus private line. Privacy means private. It's being private. So the people are considered private unless they engage in public activities. And then they can be seen as public, where a government has some jurisdiction for some certain things. And invasion of this is where they're trying to invade you being a private parent that's educating your child.
Correct.
And make you a public one. And so it's not just because we think of privacy a lot of times as like, the privacy of your home, but it's more than that.
No.
It's your private life. I have a public life and I have a private life. The public life is subject to some of the constraints of society, the social compact of our Constitution. My private life doesn't have any of that. And that's up to between me and God. And so there's just more meaning to this that we gloss over. And then it ends there with, unless due process is followed. And that is so important to understand what true due process is. It says an individual's right to live free from governmental intrusion in private or personal information is natural, essential, and inherent. Just so you guys know, that's actually a direct quote from the New Hampshire Constitution. Government cannot relabel the people or their liberty of private education into statutory creations, persons, such as calling a parent homeschool administrator. So here we're just going to call them out for everything that they're doing.
Right.
Calling a parent a homeschool administrator, relabel children to homeschool child, private right of education to homeschool program or lawful school, relabel their private papers to educational portfolio, replace due process with a trial by jury in a court of record and judicial tribunals with truancy hearing, and replace independent magistrates with administrative law judges or hearing officers. We can go on a very long discussion right now about how the judges that the people get put before aren't real judges.
Correct.
And I could show you
DCFS, all of it.
open quotes and interviews from Justice Gorsuch highlighting this very thing. He openly tells us about it. He spilled the beans on the entire administrative system.
Yep.
Where did I leave off there?
And by the way, go look it up. You can find it pretty quickly. You can find Justice Gorsuch. Like Joe said, he's done some interviews. So you guys look that up.
Yeah, and his new book that he put out.
Yep. And on his book tours where the interviews coming from. Yeah.
Completely explains all this, and it exposes the whole scam on the American people.
Yes.
It says, nor can government create discriminatory classes of people called homeschool child. And I think we've addressed this before, but that suddenly now they're creating this divide where there's public school children and now homeschool child.
That's right.
We can't be doing that as a society. The people realize that legislature cannot regulate their rights, nor can they create legislation to cause administrative agencies such as the State Board of Education, DCFS, and the Illinois State Police, among others, to do something legislature cannot do themselves. First question you have to ask yourself is, the person writing this bill, can they walk into my home and enforce any of this stuff? And the obvious answer to everybody is no, of course they can't.
Right.
What are they going to do? They're going to get the enforcement arm of government known as agencies. And yes, the state police is an agency of the executive branch. It's not the same as your local sheriff's department. It's different. Correct. It's an agency under the executive branch. DCFS is an agency under the executive branch. They're all at the command, serving at the pleasure of the governor. And our governor lets these people run wild and do all kinds of unlawful things. And so understanding that, they can't write something to make somebody else go enforce. Well, why do they do that? Because they don't want to do it. And then even, why does DCFS bring the police with them? Why do they bring the sheriff with them if they're going to try to enforce something? It's because they need the people with the guns. They need the people to enforce it, or the sheriff to help them enforce something, because they're doing it unlawfully.
That's right.
And the whole mindset of these things have to shift, where you just learn how to tell these people no. It says these agencies have been using FAW and unlawful authority with attorneys who have not understood the law to take liberty, property, and rights from the people without the constitutionally required elements of due process, with courts of record and trial by jury. This has been openly spoken about by the Supreme Court in the recent SEC v. Jakarski case. And between that one and the Raimondo, or what people call the Chevron case, the Supreme Court just openly admits all of these things are going on, and that everything for decades now has been being done in an unconstitutionally.
Yes.
And I'm going to just pause on the thought on that for a moment, because we're going to get into in a few minutes the court of record and what proper due process is. But not to skip over these maxims down below our Constitution.
Correct.
Remember, maxims are universally accepted as true. The language of a statute is to be understood and interpreted like ordinary spoken language. They write these statutes. They use attorneys, that's a whole nother topic of discussion. They use attorneys to write and create these bills.
To obfuscate.
They use language to obfuscate and to abrogate, derogate, all of these different things away from the rights of the people. And it's just on paper. It doesn't mean it's true. They cannot. This bill is literally not written in pursuance to the Constitution, if they were going to try and enforce these things on the people. Another one says that to derogate from law is to take away part of it, or to abrogate a law is to abolish it entirely. What they're doing with this is they're derogating and abrogating the rights of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and other possessions, and so on and so forth. It's just quite obvious once you really understand that. Another maxim, a home is a social unit formed by a family living together in one dwelling. Your home is not a school. It's not a homeschool. It's a social unit formed by the family living together in one dwelling. And along with that comes education, whether it's formal education or whether you're teaching your child how to talk or speak or walk. All of these things are done by parents in homes in their social unit.
That's right. And as I explain, when I'm working with anyone, whether they're in Illinois or another state that has much more restrictive, right, laws, even internationally, I've worked with families, and it's fascinating to me. But everything, and I keep saying that to try to help shift people's paradigm here, right? All you're doing as a parent, if you're choosing to put your child into a public education, you're still asking them to assist you. That's it. You're saying, hey, you know what? I think I need some help here.
Yep.
Just like I did with my own children. Okay, you know what? I think I need some help because I don't want to read and learn calculus. Thank you very much. No desire, none. So I'm going to find someone who loves it, is passionate about it, and can help me teach my son who needs it calculus. That's it. It's the same thing you're doing with the public school, right? Just getting that paradigm shift. It's exactly what we've been talking about with private liberty interests.
Yep.
Parents, you are the authority, period, when it comes to your child.
Yep.
And it's so important to get that through and to understand that no matter what you're choosing to help educate your child, that's exactly what you're doing. You're helping me, but I make the decisions. I make the choices. I decide if that's working for my child or not.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think is just foundational. And it goes exactly to what Joe was talking about with all of our private liberty interests, right? But of course, we're talking about education.
Yep.
So these maxims are super important. And like you said, that last one there, that's
critically
huge.
important to
Huge.
understand that they're the foundation of which our constitutions were even created from.
Correct.
Going down
Correct.
to section 13 here is the exact point. The right of a trial by jury, as heretofore enjoyed, shall remain inviolate.
That's right.
We have the right to a trial by jury.
That's right.
You don't get
Of
a
your
trial by
peers.
jury in a truancy hearing. You don't get one in a
Right.
DCFS hearing or in the family courts. If you're not getting a trial by jury, then you're not getting due process guaranteed.
That's exactly right.
The thing to understand is that it's the fear thing again, because even if you go and get a traffic ticket, they can't remove your right to a trial by jury. But what they do is they offer things.
Right.
They offer, a plea deal or different things like that so that you don't have to go through that process.
Or they just tell you, this is what you have to do.
Yep. And
you don't want to lose your child, then you have to do these things. And they just lay it out.
Right. And the point is that we have to understand they cannot take your children without a trial by jury. They can't do it. Now, do they do it? Yes. Are they breaking the law every time? Yes. But this is where we can't get caught into the issue where we get afraid. Like, let's say you get a knock on the door from DCFS. We get afraid, and then we let them in. And then they start investigating and doing things, and they're doing it without a warrant and everything. It's all done. All you have to do is say no. Come back with a warrant. Well, if they want to come back with a warrant, they have to have an affidavit, which they're not going to have. And they got to have a describing the particular things that they need to search and everything. And we never granted them authority to do that. There's a lot more discussion we could have on that. I don't want to sidetrack.
Yeah, I know. Joe and I, we could go back and forth on this all day for sure. Okay, moving forward. Okay, so we're coming to the end here and pulling this all together. And go ahead, Joe, because this is real. I'm going to let Joe take this on, even though I'm right there with you in terms of talking about exactly what Joe was just mentioning. Right? What's the difference? Court, right? Versus
we just think of court generally as going to court, but That's not true. What's
Right.
true is that there is a court of record, and then there are administrative tribunals or hearings, whatever we call them, depending on what the case is. So in this case, they call it a truancy hearing. Well, in order for the people to have proper due process, there are certain fundamental elements that have to be followed.
That's
And
right.
what we have here on the screen is a side by side of how they've began to change the definitions.
That's
And
right.
on the left side is the definition of what a court of record is in the Black's Law Fourth. And on
Fourth.
the right side, yeah. And
Okay.
on the right side is a definition of what it is in Black's Law Fifth. So let's read Black's Law Fifth first, because it says a court of record, a court that is required to keep a record of its proceedings. Well, that's pretty self-explanatory. And that may fine or imprison. That's all it tells you. So a court
Okay.
of record may fine or imprison and keeps a record of its proceedings. But if you go back to Black's Law Fourth Edition and read what it says that a court of record is a judicial tribunal. All right, let's pause and think about that for a minute. If you're in a truancy hearing, that's an administrative tribunal. That's
That's
not a
right.
judicial tribunal. So the person that's sitting behind the desk in the black robe is an administrative law judge. He is not an independent magistrate.
That's right.
He's working with a different hat on. And so there's things, then that's right how they start to get you down the line of getting away from your Constitution. The next thing that it says is having attributes and exercising functions independently of the person of the magistrate designed to generally hold it. So what I just said, in a truancy hearing, they're working for the state board, what was that? The State Board of Education to follow these things. They're not working for the people. They're
That's
not
right.
independent. They're actually a hired hand
Yep.
to work under that.
Government
And
agents, as you said.
yeah,
Yep.
and they're not independent, which it's critically important that we have an independent judge who's being partial to no one.
That's right.
It says, and proceeding according to the course of common law. That's it right there. Because remember, we read the definition before where common law is distinctly different than legislatively created statute.
And statutory. Correct.
So statutory law is not common law. Common law is not statutory law. And the two don't mix. They're distinctly different. So the only way that you can get drug into statutes is if you submit yourself to one of these things that you're in, like say a public school. And, if it's a principal or a public officer of the school, then their statute they have to follow. But in your private home education, you don't have to follow that stuff.
That's right. That's right. And
Um,
I think it's really, sorry, Joe. I was just
but
going to say, I think it's important here also just to see this last part, right? Because this is how things get shifted without them saying that they've completely changed it, right? So if you look at the last part here, it says it's acts and proceedings being enrolled for a perpetual memorial. So what they've done is they've ignored all the really structural
mhm,
meat of the definition and gone straight to that. And they
yep,
just changed the wording to say a court that is required to keep a record of its proceedings. They eliminated what it really is
yep,
and just went to something it should do. And that's it. And that happens time and time again. Like we've talked about all the way back in the first recording, right? With changing these definitions. So I just
yeah,
wanted to point that out because
yeah.
that's all they did.
And again, it's the biblical principle. It's Luke 11:52 defined, where Jesus says, "Woe unto you, Lord." He was prophesying there, saying, "Hey, look out for this stuff later on, because they hide the key of knowledge. The lawyers hide the key of knowledge, and not only do they not enter into the real law, but they also hinder everyone else from entering." And that's really what is, because all of these things are done. These bills aren't written by the representatives. They're written
Oh
by
no.
lawyers. The lawyers write
Hello.
them and hand them to them.
I've drafted
And
legislation from federal down to local. And
Yeah, and
yes, it's
there's
all
a
the
conflict of
lawyers.
interest right there, right
Yep.
out of the gate. But
Yep.
one last thing on this definition, it says courts may be at the same time of record for some purposes and not of record for others. So even though that you go into a truancy hearing that may look like a courtroom with a judge, it's not a court of, it may not be operating as a court of record. It might be
Right.
operating as a court not of record, which would be an administrative hearing. The people are guaranteed to have a trial by jury, which is in a court of record, which follows the course of common law, and to have the judge be an independent magistrate, not working for one of the agencies.
That's right. So important to understand all of this. Okay. Last
And
couple
then, and
definitions.
then here's a maximum law that just tells you exactly, because remember what I said in a couple slides ago. I said, remember that
Right.
they can assign penalties. It says no court, which is not a record, can impose a fine or commit any person to prison, because those powers belong only to courts of record. So
Hello.
they literally can't do what they're doing.
That's right.
They can't enforce this stuff. Now, does it happen? Yes. The reality is we've been ignorant of these things for a long time. So they've gotten comfortable with breaking the law. But when we stand on what is true, we stand on what is right, we stand on our constitutions, we take up the position of being the people over our government. This is how we begin to correct these things.
Amen. So true. And two more.
And then it says, judges are by no means favorable to things raised recently and subtly against the common law. These things that they're coming up with, even if it dates back to, say, 1970,
That's
it's
recent.
it's still recent in terms of law. Remember,
Right.
common law is distinguished from statute, and it's from immemorial antiquity. It's very old, as in like as old as God made earth. That's how old common law is. And judges are not supposed to be favorable to things raised recently because they're called innovations of law.
Yes. And what I
They're
love too is
innovating
this
new
word subtly.
standards.
Yes, exactly. Yep. Keep going. Yep.
And it
I didn't
says
mean
it
to
is the
interrupt.
duty of a judge to declare or enunciate the law, not to enact the law or make it. And that's critical to understand because this whole term called case law, which is basically a hoax. There is the law of the case, which we reviewed, Troxel v. Granville, because they were stating fundamental principles within the case. So we were
Correct.
showing how they're correctly applied. But you can't take, recent rulings and things like that and then say that that's the case law now, because the judge, it's his duty to just simply declare the law, but not enact or make it. There's no such thing as a judge-made law or case law. And that's really hard for people to understand. It's not saying that we don't use old cases to look at things and to see how they applied the law, but to see how they declared it and what it meant is something that you do. But just because, so if a judge gets a ruling wrong, that doesn't mean all of a sudden it makes it right now from here on out.
Correct. Which is why they can overturn themselves. So I just to clarify, I absolutely right on, Joe. And everyone, so a lot of times things will get confused. People say, what about precedent? Precedent is part of common law. What all that means is what we're talking about right here, where you can look to see how the law was interpreted, right?
Mhm.
But you can't create new law. And we call it legislating from the bench, right?
Yep.
And the Supreme Court, again, just recently in one of their decisions, commented on that. And it comes out all the time, right? They're not there to say, to create new law. They're there to say, hey, this law here, right here, is unconstitutional or it's constitutional, right? And a lot of times people will kind of, like Joe was talking about, confuse that case law. Well, then that means that's the law now. Well, no,
Right.
not at all. And I especially appreciate, like what Joe just said too, everything has to go back to the Constitution, the maxims of law, and common law. It's what the entire
100%.
foundation of even our statutory system is. right? But that's where you're going.
Yeah.
That is the key where you
And
need to go to interpret.
before I forget, this is something I wanted to say, and I don't even know if it's relevant right now, but I just thought of it as you were talking. Because in the notice that has been sent out, there's been a couple of legislators that have responded to that. And one of the things that they say are like, well, this isn't really doing it. We already have laws that are enacted for, the school code and different things and minimum education and stuff like that. Don't let that fool you. That's something raised recently and subtly against common law. And the fact that they say that and they're using other statutes to point to what they're doing, all they're doing is identifying for us other areas where statutes are wrong. In this case, we're against the Homeschool Act, which is creating unlawful statute. Well, Illinois has lots of unlawful statutes that have been made. And all of those things, all they're doing is highlighting things that we need to go back and make sure that get corrected over time here.
Yep. Amen. And to that end, Joe, awesome. Always fantastic talking to you. And Joe and I both have a vested interest in this as parents, right? Whether you're parent, grandparent, aunt, or uncle. I mean, guys, this is our kids. This is so important to get right for future generations, for our posterity, right? Like we've been talking about. And obligation, like Joe has mentioned over and over again, God doesn't say to us, hey, God, take care of this. And okay, I'm done. That no. We knowing our obligations, knowing God's law, right? As not citizens, that's a whole nother conversation. But as people, as God's people, right? And parents, this is so vitally important. And so what I'm asking everyone to do, and why I just am so thankful that Joe took all this time out of his busy schedule to talk to you guys about this notice that Assemble Illinois has put together and Joe's put together. I can't stress enough how important it is to go and sign that and to make that your first step. Everybody's asking, and I love it. Everybody's saying, okay, what can I do? What else can I do? And you guys are taking time out of your day because this is important. We know that. We feel it. And hopefully these videos have helped you to understand why you're feeling that way. It's very legitimate, right? Parents, I hear that all the time. Well, okay, this can't be right. You're right. It's not. It's not. And hopefully these videos will help you to understand more why it's not okay on so many fronts, right? So you guys should be able to see here where you're watching this video. We'll have a direct link to Assemble Illinois. Actually, I think it'll be on our website, so you can go to aspireeducation.us. So it's Aspire Education altogether. We'll be posting this out. You guys will be able, and I think we'll have some clips out there too, but the full videos will be on our website for you guys to grab, and we'll have a direct link to Assemble Illinois, which also has some couple really good videos you should watch. That Joe, I think you've done them, right? You and or your brother.
Yeah.
The ones I've seen, they're fantastic.
A couple things out there. There's a lot of things that we've been doing behind the scenes and stuff as far as notices and different things. But some of the big issues we've put on and put out other notices like this one. And so there's some of those previous things that are out there. Those notices are no longer live, but they're very good teaching videos to show just how far off of our constitutions that we've gotten.
Exactly.
One thing I just wanted to add at the end here is a lot of people are going to say, okay, great. You put out a notice, you signed it, but now what?
Right. And that's where I was going. So yes, perfect. Go ahead.
We're not going to get into all of it right now. The main thing right now is getting the notices out and into the hands of our legislators, because we've openly given them notice. We give them a chance to respond. If they don't respond, they agree. None of them have responded. The ones that have responded, they haven't done it in the correct manner under sworn affidavit. They're just sending back their opinion to you. Thank you very much for acknowledging that you received the notice then. Like, that's all that does. That's why when we mail them out, we mail them with the green card receipts in the registered mail, certified mail, because we want proof that we did that. So my personal plan, and this is not advice or anything like that to anybody, but my personal plan is to make sure that my notice gets mailed, certified with return receipt. It's going to go unrebutted because they can't rebut it. I mean, we're only stating facts in the Constitution in there. They can't be rebutted. So it's going to go unrebutted. Now, if the legislature decides to dig in their heels and pass this anyways, then my personal next step will be that I will make an affidavit that I sent them that notice and that they agreed that they had no authority to do it. And it's going to say things along those lines. And then that affidavit I'm going to send to DCFS, to the local sheriff, to the Illinois State Police, to the governor, to the legislature again, to the Illinois State Supreme Court. I'm gonna mail that out to some people. And that's going to be proof and receipt that they've received the affidavit. The same thing that happens with that. They're not going to be able to rebut the affidavit because all it's really going to say is, hey, I sent you a notice and you didn't respond. It's very simple. And then I hang on to those things because now those become your shield. We sent out the sword with the notice. We sent out the sword with the affidavit, and now those return receipts become our shield. So if they were to try to enforce anything personally on me, the first thing I would do is show the DCFS worker or the public school. That's the other people I would send it to. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention. In this case, I would send it to the state Board of Education, and I would send it to my local school district superintendent, because those people need to know that we sent them stuff, they didn't do anything about it. And now each time that you're doing this, if anybody wants to come and attack you, you now have preemptively put your Constitution in front of them by sworn affidavit, and they really have to break the law at this point to want to carry on with anything. Because we're coming to a day where the masters are coming back home. Daddy's home to government. We're coming back home. The people are learning. We've been ignorant for too long. We're learning and we're coming. And we're coming to correct the bad actions of our government. And this is all in peace. This is all just with pieces of paper. This isn't, any type of violence or anything like that. This is just using the law that God gave us. We use his word, we use the maxims, we use the Constitution, and we put that in front of people who are supposed to be following the law, and they've sworn an oath to do so. And if they want to go ahead and breach that, they should pay attention to what our Supreme Court is currently doing, because our Supreme Court is currently pointing everything back to the constitutions. They're pointing everything back to text, history, and tradition.
Finally.
And we are finally getting a Supreme Court that is agreeing with the Constitution correctly according to the fundamental principles. And there's a new thing that God's doing. We are recurring back to the way things used to be. What we didn't know before is that our state legislature, their primary thing is to redress grievances, and the way that they did that was by taking affidavits from the people and correcting and giving these redress and remedy. We didn't know that. They've gotten so far away from what they're supposed to do that we don't even understand that anymore. So the new thing is the old thing, and the old thing is the new thing. We're going back to God's way of doing things to get off of this course that we've been on.
Amen. That's awesome. Yeah. All the more reason to, subscribe to Assemble Illinois, because Joe is great about letting everyone know, like if there's a new notice that needs to come out. And this is about protecting your rights. So like I mentioned before, I'll be doing some other videos, but this is the most important one. Just simply understanding to protect, not even protect your rights, but to assert your rights, right? And to say, no, we have these rights, and to assert them again and make sure that the authority, as Joe said, the masters are coming back and showing their authority, right? And that's really important here. And on the other front, like Joe said, if they're, if they dig in and decide to pass this, despite all of the calls they're getting, then there are next steps that you can take again to assert your authority. So don't fear. Don't fear. That is the main reason, I think, for Joe too and me, that we want you guys to hear this information, because step out of fear. This is actually glorious. Joe and I basically said together when we were talking about this, I don't know, last week, and we're like, this is a blessing. It's a blessing to have this come out again. And what a great opportunity to really be able to understand all of these principles and have that paradigm shift that Joe had, I had, and a lot of people that we know have had, right? And so everybody, we just feel really blessed that we could bring this to you. I can't thank Joe enough. He's got so much knowledge and wisdom in this area.
It's my pleasure, because we really need to see what God's doing here.
Amen.
Because he's provoking his people.
Yes.
He knows what gets on the nerve of the people, and your children is like, there are so many things that we've moved away from the Constitution, and if this doesn't provoke people to take action, what's going to?
I agree.
Seriously, what's going to?
I
we
agree.
need to become a people that are provoked to do righteousness. And
Amen.
doing righteousness is exactly this. We are being provoked by God. He's allowed this thing to come up and against us, because now he's going to give us the wisdom. He's going to give us the knowledge and the understanding of how to peacefully take care of this with pieces of paper that we're sending in the mail.
That's right.
And there comes a time where we have to say, okay, are we going to put on the full armor of God and stand?
Mm-hmm.
Or are we just going to sit back and let this thing happen? And I can think of no better subject that God would use than our children.
Yeah. Amen. And on that note, I can't think of any other way to end other than on what you've just said. And thank you again. This honestly fantastic. Pleasure. Yeah. Great information. And you guys can always reach out again, assembleillinois.il, assembleil.com. But the link will be there, /forms.
Yep.
With an S, forms with an S.
Correct.
Okay. And the link will be here. So you'll be able to grab it real quick, jump on over, read it for yourself. I encourage you, Joe mentioned it a couple times, read this, and Joe wanted to really highlight certain parts, but read it through. It makes incredible sense. Right. And that's just such a blessing. So again, thanks, Joe. And I'm sure we'll be in touch soon and talk some more.
Amen. To God be the glory.
Amen. Have a great day, everybody.